Underneath the noise of every argument is a choice, one that most people never realize they're making. Not the choice of who wins or loses, but the deeper one, whether you're protecting your peace or feeding your ego. In a world wired for reaction, we've normalized the idea that every disagreement needs a response, that silence is weakness, and that being right is more important than being calm. But let me ask you this. When was the last time you won an argument and still felt empty? When was the last time you kept proving your point, but lost a piece of your dignity in the process? We've all been there, trying to explain truth to someone who doesn't want it, just louder. We replay the conversation in our heads, crafting better responses, wittier comebacks, only to realize later, we weren't trying to be heard, we were trying not to feel dismissed. The deeper truth? Not everyone deserves your explanation, and not every argument is a battlefield. Some are ego traps disguised as conversations, and the moment you step in, you've already lost something that matters far more than being right: your inner clarity. This video isn't about how to win arguments. It's about how to recognize when you're stepping into a fight that drains you, confuses you, erodes you. Because behind every loud voice, every passive-aggressive jab, every never-ending loop of circular logic, there's one dangerous illusion: that your peace depends on someone else's understanding. But real strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout, comes from knowing when to walk away. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you 6 powerful signs that you're arguing with someone who's not interested in truth, but in chaos. And more importantly, I'll show you how the Stoics would respond, not by fighting louder, but by standing clearer, quieter, and stronger. If you're tired of losing energy to pointless debates, if you're ready to reclaim your focus, then lean in, because this isn't just a list, it's a map back to your mental sovereignty. Let's begin. Here's the completed section. Sometimes a person raises their voice not because they're confident, but because they're cornered. In the chaos of modern conversation, volume has become the camouflage of weak logic. You've likely met them. People who, when challenged, don't clarify their point, they just speak louder. They interrupt, they repeat, they inflate their presence in the room as if loudness could overpower truth. But here's the quiet realization. When someone substitutes noise for clarity, they're not arguing with you. They're trying to silence their own discomfort with not knowing, and they hope you'll mistake their intensity for insight. The Stoics knew this game long before the first comment section existed. They observed that those who truly understood something rarely needed to shout it, because clarity is quiet, precision doesn't tremble. A man who truly sees has no need to blind others with his voice, but those who equate volume with conviction, they live in the arena of noise, not of wisdom. It's not an exchange of ideas, it's a dominance display, a verbal chest thump. The goal is no longer understanding, but control. In today's world, the algorithm rewards rage. Outrage gets attention. Anger spreads faster than empathy. And so many have learned that if they speak louder, more often, and with just enough emotional charge, they'll win, even when they're wrong. But win what exactly? Your exhaustion? Your silence? Your inner surrender? That's not victory. That's erosion. Arguing with someone who weaponizes volume is like stepping into a storm that has no center. You keep shouting to be heard, but the louder you respond, the more you become the very thing you're trying to escape. The argument morphs into a vortex, no longer about the topic, but about who can outlast the chaos. And once you're pulled into that loop, reason doesn't matter anymore. You're no longer defending truth. You're defending your ego. I remember watching a colleague once, calm, articulate, data in hand, laying out a well-reasoned point in a meeting. And across from him, another man slammed the table, raised his voice, and barked accusations. He brought no evidence, no logic, just force. And the room began to lean in, not toward truth, but toward intensity. Because intensity is primal. It triggers the nervous system. It commands attention, even when it lacks substance. Some nodded along, not because he made sense, but because challenging him felt too costly. And that's what loudness buys. Not respect, but compliance through fear. This is why Stoicism warns us. Never confuse noise for knowledge. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that if someone proves us wrong, we should be grateful. Because the goal is not to dominate, it's to see more clearly. But in a society where being right is a status symbol, humility is mistaken for weakness, and silence is misread as submission. So people shout. They weaponize their lungs because they've run out of logic. But the Stoic doesn't mirror that. The Stoic doesn't escalate. The Stoic steps back, breathes, and protects their clarity like a sacred fire. When someone yells at you, they expect you to meet them in the storm, but you don't have to. You can anchor yourself in stillness. Let their volume reveal their fear. Let their noise expose their insecurity. Because your peace is never preserved by matching chaos, it's preserved by mastering your own response. That's not cowardice. That's cognitive control. When you choose not to raise your voice in return, you're not losing ground. You're refusing to play the wrong game. You're choosing to remain in your own fortress of thought while they throw rocks at their own reflection. That's the paradox. The louder they become, the more you learn about them, and the less you need to say. So the next time someone shouts over you, interrupts, or tries to overpower your voice with theirs, remember this: your clarity is not measured by decibels, and your peace does not require their understanding. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is to pause and let the storm pass without you. Because silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And clarity, true clarity, is the loudest response you'll ever need. You'll know the moment it happens. The discussion begins with ideas, principles, opinions, maybe even facts. But slowly, it shifts. The person across from you stops speaking about the topic and starts speaking about you. Not your logic, your character. Not your data, your intentions. What was once a debate becomes an interrogation of your identity. And here's the truth. The moment someone attacks you instead of your idea, they're not trying to win the argument. They're trying to make you lose your center. This is emotional warfare, and it's older than logic itself. When people run out of facts, they reach for fear. They want you rattled, defensive, unsure of yourself. Because if they can make you bleed emotionally, they never have to answer your reasoning. It's not a clash of ideas, it's a trap of identity. They don't aim for your beliefs, they aim for your dignity. This shift often happens so subtly, we don't notice it until we've already fallen into the trap. One moment you're clarifying your point, the next you're defending your job title, your past mistakes, your tone of voice, your facial expression, your entire moral compass. And by then, it's no longer about the idea. It's about whether or not you deserve to be in the room. That's not debate. That's ego bait. The Stoics understood this with brutal clarity. Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens that harms you, it's your opinion of it. And in moments like this, that quote becomes a sword, because what happens is an insult. But whether it defines you, that's a choice. When someone pivots from the argument to your character, it's often not because they've discovered something about you, it's because they've run out of substance. But the trap works because we're wired to defend ourselves. When someone questions our integrity, something primal rises. The urge to fire back, to explain, to clear our name, it's strong. And that's exactly what they want. Because the moment you shift from your logic to your emotions, they've won. They've hijacked the narrative, and you're no longer debating the truth. You're trying to survive the spotlight. Arguing with someone who attacks your identity is like playing chess with someone who flips the board when they're losing. It's not strategy, it's sabotage. It's a signal that the discussion has become a performance, and you're the prop. But a Stoic doesn't perform for the insecure. A Stoic doesn't defend their worth to people who never question their own logic. The wise remain unmoved. Because your dignity is not a debate, it's a boundary. I once watched this happen in real time. A woman was calmly explaining a project idea in a leadership meeting. She used clear logic, data, and timelines. And then a colleague interrupted, not to refute her ideas, but to say, "You're always so controlling. Why can't you just support others' plans for once?" Just like that, the room shifted. It wasn't about the plan anymore. It was about her personality, her past behaviors, her tone. It was no longer about logic. It became personal theater. And yet she didn't flinch. She turned and said, "If you have concerns about the plan, I'm here to address them. But I'm not here to defend my personality." Then silence. The room turned back to the content, because she refused to be baited into the emotional arena. That's power. That's stoic posture. Not passivity, but precision. When you respond to a personal attack with personal reaction, you validate the tactic. You make it useful to them. But when you stay rooted in clarity, when you don't flinch, you expose their weakness. Because a person with truth on their side doesn't need to insult. They return to the point. They stay in the light of reason. This is why Stoicism trains you not to be soft, but to be still. Stillness isn't surrender, it's control. Your self-worth is not a point to be proven. It's a quiet boundary that you protect with how little you feel the need to explain yourself. The moment you realize that, their words lose weight. You don't have to argue back. You only have to not step into their arena. So when someone attacks your integrity, your character, your past, pause. Ask yourself, have they refuted my point? Or are they just uncomfortable with my clarity? If it's the latter, breathe. Let the insult fall to the floor. Don't pick it up. Don't react. Don't feed the fire. Let your restraint become your resistance. Because people who abandon logic for insult are already waving a white flag. They just want to drag you down with them. But you don't need to lower yourself to rise above. Let your silence make the echo of their insecurity louder than any reply ever could. And remember, you're not here to argue for your worth. You're here to protect your peace. And sometimes that means letting go of the need to correct the person who's already lost the plot. You can feel it within minutes of a conversation, the wall. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't listen either. It simply waits for you to finish speaking so it can repeat what it already believes. No matter how much logic you offer, no matter how gently or clearly you phrase your points, nothing penetrates. You're not talking to a person anymore. You're talking to a performance. And the goal of that performance isn't truth, it's self-protection. Some people don't enter conversations to grow. They enter to defend the identity they've built around being right. Their opinions are not ideas to explore, but fortresses they refuse to leave. To admit they're wrong would mean tearing down a piece of who they believe they are, and that feels like death to the ego. So instead, they double down. They don't listen to understand, they listen to reload. Arguing with someone who never changes their mind is like shouting across a canyon that only echoes your own words back to you. It's exhausting, not because you're wrong, but because you're pouring clarity into a vessel that was never open. And slowly, that effort starts to take something from you. Your patience, your focus, your belief that dialogue can heal. You start to mistake resistance for depth. But the truth is, rigidity isn't strength. It's fear wearing armor. The Stoics taught us to welcome correction, not resist it. Seneca said, "While we teach, we learn." Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove you wrong, be grateful. They are helping you move closer to the truth." That's not weakness. That's wisdom. A mind that cannot evolve is not powerful. It's paralyzed. And yet many people mistake conviction for clarity. But conviction without openness is just stubbornness in a tuxedo. In today's world where opinions are broadcast in all caps and changing your mind is seen as betrayal, intellectual humility is a radical act. Social media has made it worse. Algorithms reward certainty, outrage, repetition. The more rigid your view, the more tribal affirmation you receive. So people build their identity on unshakable views, not because they have examined them, but because they've been rewarded for holding them. It's not knowledge, it's narrative armor. The danger is not just that they won't change, it's that you'll believe you can make them. You'll believe that if you explain it just right, say it with the perfect tone, use the right metaphor, they'll finally understand. But you're not in a conversation, you're in a ritual, a script, one they've performed many times before. And your role in that script is to tire out, give up, or eventually join the noise. But the Stoic refuses to play that part. The Stoic doesn't invest clarity in a black hole. You don't try to water concrete and hope for flowers. You speak truth once, with composure, and then you observe. If there is curiosity on the other side, you continue. If there is only defense and deflection, you preserve your energy, because inner peace is not maintained by endless explanation. It's protected by discernment. Discernment means you don't see every conversation as your battlefield. It means you don't need to win someone over to feel validated. You recognize when someone has built a fortress of ego around their beliefs, and you let them live there. You don't bang on the gates hoping to be let in. You nod, step back, and continue building your own clarity elsewhere. I've been there, thinking if I just explained it better, I could reach them. But eventually I realized I wasn't debating. I was performing emotional labor for someone who wasn't even listening. In that moment, that clarity was liberation, because I didn't need them to agree. I needed to reclaim the part of myself that thought their agreement gave my truth weight. It didn't. A Stoic knows being right is not the goal, seeing clearly is. And some truths don't require applause. They require solitude. You don't always need to correct others. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is protect your clarity from those who don't want it. And when you do, you don't just walk away from them. You walk back to yourself. So the next time you find yourself explaining the same point over and over, ask this: am I being patient or am I being drained? Because patience becomes self-harm when you keep handing your peace to someone who's not holding out their hand to receive it. You owe no one your depletion, especially not those committed to misunderstanding you. Walk away, not in frustration, but in respect, for your time, for your mind, for your inner clarity. Because some minds don't need a louder answer. They need silence to realize what they missed. And you? You need no audience to validate what's true. Truth stands, even when you walk away. You make a clear point, calm, reasoned, maybe even supported with data. And then it happens. The other person pauses, eyes welling with tears. Their voice trembles as they say, "I just feel like you're attacking me." Suddenly, the conversation isn't about the facts anymore. It's about their feelings. And before you realize it, you're not debating a topic. You're comforting someone who's turned their discomfort into evidence. This is one of the subtlest, most disarming traps in any argument. The moment emotion becomes a shield against logic, not because emotions are wrong, but because they're now being used as proof. It's a kind of narrative sleight of hand. They don't refute your idea. They reframe the context so that having the idea at all is now the problem. They don't want to meet your clarity. They want to dissolve it in a flood of feeling. The danger here isn't just manipulation. Sometimes the emotion is genuine. The tears are real. The overwhelm is honest. But that doesn't make it relevant. Feeling hurt doesn't make the other person right. Just as feeling calm doesn't guarantee you are. Stoicism teaches that emotion is not proof. It's a signal. It points to something, but it isn't the thing itself. And the moment we confuse the two, the moment we begin to tiptoe around clarity because someone feels uncomfortable, we begin trading truth for harmony. It's easy to fall into this. Most people aren't trying to dominate when they cry in conversation. They're reacting from wounds, from fatigue, from learned helplessness. But as a Stoic, your role is not to match their emotion. Your role is to see the difference between understanding their experience and abandoning your clarity to avoid upsetting them. I remember a conversation where someone challenged a workplace decision. The points were fair, the tone measured, but the person being challenged said, "I don't feel safe in this space anymore." And just like that, the room froze. Not because the argument was wrong, but because no one wanted to be seen as the person who made someone feel unsafe. The discussion ended, not on logic, but on emotional override. That's the power of emotional evidence. It bypasses debate. It demands deference. And if you're not careful, it teaches everyone else to value emotional reactions over intellectual accountability. That's not empathy. That's erosion. But the Stoic response is not to mock the emotion. It's to separate it from the core. You can validate someone's emotional state without validating their argument. You can say, "I hear that this is difficult for you," and still hold the line of your reasoning. You don't need to yell. You don't need to dismiss. You just need to stand where clarity stands and refuse to be pulled into the current of performance. Epictetus taught that it's not things that disturb us, but our judgment of those things. This is the foundation of Stoic composure, not numbness, but discernment. When someone uses emotion to redirect the conversation, they may not be conscious of it. They may genuinely believe they're being attacked, but that perception is not a refutation. It's a perspective, and you as a Stoic must navigate that without becoming part of their storm. This doesn't mean being cold, it means being steady. The moment you abandon your point because someone tears up, you're not resolving the conflict, you're avoiding it. You're rewarding emotional reactivity instead of honest reflection. And in doing so, you teach yourself that peace must always come at the cost of your own voice. But your voice matters. Your reasoning matters. Your clarity, when rooted in respect, does not become cruelty just because someone feels discomfort. And if you've chosen your words with care, with thought, and with a clean heart, then their reaction belongs to them, not to you. So what do you do in that moment? You pause, you soften your tone if needed, but you don't surrender your position. You remain calm, not because you're unfeeling, but because you're anchored. You hold the space for discomfort without letting it distort the truth. This is the quiet mastery the Stoics pursued. Not to avoid conflict, but to navigate it with discipline. You don't need to escalate. You don't need to apologize for being clear. You simply stay in your lane of logic while allowing others the dignity of their emotion, without letting that emotion rewrite the facts. And if someone consistently uses emotion to shut down hard conversations, that's not vulnerability. It's control. It's not an open heart. It's a closed gate dressed in sentiment. And your peace is not the price to be paid for someone else's inability to sit with discomfort. Because if every disagreement is treated as an emotional threat, then no truth can survive. And if you let emotions replace evidence, clarity dies quietly, not with a scream, but with a whisper of self-abandonment. Your calm is not coldness, your logic is not aggression, and your silence, when chosen wisely, is not avoidance. It is the last line of defense for your dignity. So hold the line, not with harshness, but with stillness. Let others feel, let them speak, but don't confuse their feelings with your fault. Clarity isn't cruel, it's sacred. You begin with a clear point, sharp, focused, calm. But just as the conversation starts to take shape, it bends. Not because of your argument, but because of theirs. They bring up something unrelated, something irrelevant, sometimes even something from the past. A misstep you once made, a friend you once supported, an article you once liked. And now you're not discussing the issue anymore. You're defending your history. This is the art of derailment, a subtle but powerful tactic where the other person shifts the ground beneath your feet until you're standing somewhere you never meant to go. It's not that they don't hear your point, they just don't want to sit in it. So instead, they lead you elsewhere, somewhere foggy, somewhere noisy, because the more confused the path becomes, the less clear your point feels, even to you. In these moments, clarity isn't defeated by logic, it's drowned in distraction. The argument never ends because it never stays in one place long enough to be addressed. This isn't a debate, it's a maze. And the longer you stay in it, the more likely you are to forget what you came to say. This is how emotional and cognitive bandwidth gets hijacked, not by confrontation, but by fragmentation. The Stoics would see this for what it is, a loss of narrative control. Marcus Aurelius taught us to stay focused on what is within our power, to not let ourselves be carried away by irrelevancies. And that's exactly what derailment tries to do. It invites you to chase ghosts, to abandon the center of the storm, and instead fight shadows that mean nothing. The more you chase, the less you hold. Modern arguments, especially online, are built for this. Social media thrives on fragmentation. Every reply thread a new tangent. Every distraction, a new flame. We scroll into oblivion, dragged by half-context and side issues that weren't even part of the original message. The tactic works because it's disguised as engagement, but it's not. It's avoidance dressed in debate. I once watched a public discussion about climate policy. The speaker outlined clear data, actionable points, but the opponent didn't counter the evidence. He said, "Didn't you once fly private to a summit?" And just like that, the focus shifted. No longer about climate, now about hypocrisy. The topic was real, but the spotlight was moved. The room leaned away from the facts and toward the distraction. That's the tactic. Not to defeat your idea, but to tire you out by making you defend a dozen others. The Stoic response? Refuse the detour. Come back to the point. Say, "That's not what we're discussing." Re-anchor the dialogue. And if they persist, walk. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. Because when someone keeps changing the subject, they're not trying to understand, they're trying to survive your clarity. Clarity, after all, is uncomfortable for people who aren't ready to face it. So they scramble the signal. They throw noise at the structure. They widen the conversation until it breaks under its own weight. And you get pulled in, thinking if you just address every side issue, eventually they'll return to the center. But they won't, because their goal was never the center. It was escape. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do." The same applies in dialogue. First, know what your point is, then protect it. Don't let them bait you into side paths where your truth becomes diluted. Stay where the signal is strong, where the conversation is still about ideas, not histories, not hypotheticals, not projections. Derailment is also deeply psychological. It works by weaponizing your need to be understood. It whispers, if you don't explain this, they'll think less of you. And so you follow, you clarify, you defend. But in that moment, you're no longer protecting the truth. You're chasing approval in a room that has no ears. But the Stoic doesn't chase. The Stoic centers. The Stoic returns to the main thread like gravity, anchored, calm, unshaken. When someone derails the dialogue, it's not your job to follow. It's your job to pause, to hold the thread. And if the thread snaps, you let it fall. Not because you couldn't argue, but because you choose not to argue badly. You are not obligated to follow someone into their noise, especially not when your clarity took work, especially not when your peace depends on staying grounded. You don't need to answer every detour. You don't need to correct every lie. You only need to return to the truth you came with. The rest, let it scatter, let it shout, let it echo in the hallway of distraction without you. Because clarity is not about controlling the whole room. It's about refusing to get lost in it. There's a particular type of person who enters an argument like it's a battlefield. And you are not an equal. You're the enemy. They don't care about clarity. They don't seek understanding. They want one thing: to win. Every word is a weapon. Every pause is a setup. Every nod is bait. You're not having a conversation. You're being hunted in a war you didn't agree to fight. These are not debates of mutual discovery. These are ego contests disguised as dialogue. And if you pay attention, the signs are clear. They interrupt when you begin to make sense. They raise their voice when logic starts to land. They move goalposts, shift standards, redefine terms, not because they're confused, but because conceding anything would feel like losing power. And here's the hidden truth. People who argue only to win are deeply afraid of what losing might reveal. Their identity is tethered to being right. To question their idea is to question their worth. So they fight not for truth, but for self-preservation, not for logic, but for ego. The Stoics warned us, pride is the enemy of growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion, but a person who always needs to win doesn't believe that. They see every disagreement as a threat, every correction as an attack, every pause as an opening to dominate. Winning for them isn't about truth, it's about survival. And if you're not careful, you'll start to play by their rules. You'll start aiming not to express truth, but to win too. You'll feel the heat rise in your chest, the need to prove, outwit, demolish. And just like that, you've left the path. You're no longer in pursuit of wisdom. You're in a tug-of-war of egos, where even victory leaves you feeling small. I've felt it before. When someone twists your point, mocks your tone, sneers as if they found your weakness. You want to strike back. You want to show them you're not to be underestimated. But in doing so, you hand them your clarity. You accept their frame, that the goal is not truth, but triumph. And once you're in that frame, you've already lost the most important thing, the reason you spoke in the first place. The Stoic knows, clarity is a destination, not a competition. Epictetus taught that we should say only what is necessary and no more, because when we speak to win, we say too much. We overextend. We become entangled. But when we speak to express truth, we don't need theatrics. We don't need to conquer. We only need to stand. The person obsessed with winning wants an audience, even if it's just you. Their goal isn't mutual insight, it's emotional validation. And if you stop feeding that fire, if you stop performing for them, they lose momentum because their fuel is your reaction. Without it, their aggression collapses in on itself. So what's the Stoic response? You exit the game. You stop playing tug-of-war. Let go of the rope, not with contempt, but with calm. You can say, I'm not interested in winning this. I'm interested in clarity. If that's not what you're here for, I'll walk. And then do it. No grand exit, no dramatics, just sovereignty. Because here's the deeper truth. Winning an argument with someone who's not interested in truth isn't a win. It's a drain. You may out-talk them, out-logic them, outlast them, but it leaves a bitter taste. Why? Because deep down, you know the victory wasn't real. You didn't build a bridge. You dug a trench. The Stoics understood this. The goal is not to triumph over others, but to master yourself. When someone wants to win at all costs, they've already lost something inside. The ability to listen, to adjust, to grow. But when you choose to step back, not because you're weak, but because you're wise, you don't just leave the argument, you rise above it. And here's the paradox. They might claim they've won because you walked away. But you know the truth. You didn't quit the conversation. You quit the illusion that you could bring truth to someone who only sees combat. You protect your clarity. You guard your peace. Because if you argue with a fool long enough, the world won't know the difference. And worse, you may forget the difference yourself. So the next time you sense it, that electric pull to win, pause. Ask yourself, why am I speaking? To express truth or to outshine someone who isn't even holding light? Choose truth. Choose stillness. Choose to walk away with your clarity intact. Because in the end, the quiet dignity of knowing who you are is worth far more than any hollow victory over someone who never came to listen. There's a certain silence that follows every argument you no longer feel the need to win. It's not empty. It's not bitter. It's full of clarity, of restraint, of peace reclaimed. When you step away from a battle that was never about truth, you don't leave as a loser. You leave as someone who remembered what the battle was costing. Not just time or energy, but self-respect. Across the 6 signs we've explored, one thread runs through them all. The person you're arguing with isn't committed to truth. They're committed to control. Control of the frame, the emotion, the direction, the outcome. And in that storm, if you don't anchor yourself, you'll be swept into fights that aren't even yours. You'll find yourself proving things that don't need to be proven, defending truths that were never in danger. But Stoicism teaches us a different path, one where restraint is strength, where clarity speaks louder than volume, where walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That's hard in a world obsessed with being right. But sometimes letting someone else think they've won is the highest form of power, because you no longer need their perception to validate your clarity. When you no longer argue to protect your ego, you begin to argue only when there is value. And that changes everything. You stop entering battles that lead nowhere. You stop trading your calm for someone else's chaos. You speak only when speaking serves. And when it doesn't, you let silence do the talking. That's what mastery looks like. Not in volume, not in victory, but in knowing when your voice is best used and when your silence is your sharpest sword. If you've made it this far, you already know, not every voice deserves an answer. Not every argument deserves your presence. The ability to walk away isn't just emotional intelligence, it's spiritual maturity. Because peace isn't found by silencing others. It's found by silencing the part of yourself that needs to win them over. In a world addicted to reaction, choosing stillness is rebellion. In a culture built on shouting, choosing to pause is power. And in the face of foolishness, choosing clarity over combat is the mark of someone who no longer lives to impress, but to remain intact. So the next time you find yourself in the heat of an argument, ask one quiet question. Is this worth the cost of my calm? And if the answer is no, walk. Not out of fear, but out of freedom. You were never here to win petty fights. You were here to master your response to them.